Welcome to Discovering the Ancient Paths. I am Pastor Mark Biltz of El Shaddai Ministries. We meet every Saturday morning in Tacoma, Washington from 10 a.m. to 12:30. One of the most exciting things we do is to look at the New Testament through the lens of the culture during the very days of the Messiah. We also go through the Torah, or the first 5 books of Moses, throughout the entire year, dividing it into 52 sections, so over the year, all 5 books are covered. Remember after the resurrection, on the road to Emmaus, how the disciples' hearts were burning as Jesus opened up the Old Testament to them in ways they had never seen. That's what we do every week. Join us on the journey of your life right here at El Shaddai Ministries, meeting every Saturday morning right here in Tacoma, Washington from 10 a.m. to 12:30. We'll see you there. This Torah portion is quite an interesting Torah portion. Let's see, you can go ahead and put up the first slide. Yitro, in English we say Jethro. And we find on your notes the very first verse in Exodus 18, verse 1. It says, when Yitro, who was the priest of Midian, and he was Moses' father-in-law. What does that mean? Moses married a Midianite. Okay, so Moses married a Midianite. And his father-in-law was, it says, a priest of Midian. And he had heard of all the great things that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, and that the Lord had even brought Israel out of Egypt. I mean, that is quite an incredible feat. When you think of how strong Egypt was as a power of that day, and it's like, think of, trying to get people out of a prison. I mean, let's say we have people in Iran in a prison, and the president wants to send people over there to break them out of prison and all the covert operations to get them out. Well, here God, right out in the broad open daylight, they were slaves. They were prisoners in Egypt, and he just brings them out. Okay, so we know Moses married a Midianite. Do you know who else married a Midianite about that same time? Who knows? Who can remember who else married a Midianite? I'll give you a hint. It was not Aaron. Aaron's wife was Elisheva, or Elizabeth, from the tribe of Judah, and he was from Levi. But it was his son. So what was his? Phineas, the one that had the javelin that shish kebabbed, because the Midianites were trying to deceive Israel. And so God said he's going to have war with the Midianites. But can you imagine having to go against family? I mean, think about it. Here, his wife, you're about to kill all of her relatives, And so I think it's interesting. But what some of you may not know is those people that Moses married, that Phineas is, married, guess who they are today? The Druze. How many of you know, who does not know who the Druze are? Okay, the Druze, they're a group of people. They have their own religion. It's not Islam by any means. But the Druze, their belief is they don't try to gain land. Whatever country they're in, they support the country that they're in. So the Druze in Israel will fight the Druze in Syria. And there's a lot of Druze who are part of the IDF. They're very involved, and they very much support Israel, and they're united with Israel. And what's so fascinating, that even I think it's this weekend, there's a big celebration in Israel celebrating the Druze and all the things that they do. But what's fascinating, it is they've always believed that they were descendants of Jethro or Yitro. I don't know how many of you guys knew that. But the other thing is this, I want you to know that word for priest, who knows the Hebrew word for priest? Cohen. But did you know Cohen does not always mean priest? If you look at your next verse in 2 Samuel 8, verse 18, it talks about David's sons were chief rulers. Well, we know David's from what tribe? Judah. The priests are from what tribe? Levi. Well, here it says David's sons were chief rulers, and guess what the Hebrew word for rulers is? It's Cohen. So Cohen can be translated as priest, or it could be translated as ruler. So does that mean Jethro was a ruler in Midian or a priest in Midian? Or could he have been both a ruler and a priest? Typically, I've heard it said that when Cohen is used in connection to a geographic location, it refers to a governor or a chief ruler. All right, now, where did the Midianites come from? Who were the parents? Where did the Midianites come from? Okay, Abraham's wife, Keturah. Remember, after Sarah dies, he ends up marrying this other lady named Keturah. This is Genesis 25, right in there. So let's look at Exodus 18. Let's look at verse 19 through 21. Jethro comes up to Moses, and he wants to give him some advice. And he says to Moses, why don't you stand before God for the people, that you may bring all the difficulties to God, and teach them the statutes and all the laws, show them the way in which they must walk and all the work they must do. Moreover, why don't you select from all the people able men? And look at what their qualifications have to be. They have to fear God. They have to be men of truth and hate covetousness. Now, how many thinks that fits our politicians today? Do our politicians, do our leaders today fear God? Are they people of truth? And do they hate covetousness, or are they all trying to build their own little serfdom? But this is what it's supposed to be like. Those who are to rule over you are really to be your servants, not your dictators. Well, I think it's interesting in Psalms 1, verse 1 and 2, it says, blessed is the man that doesn't walk in the counsel of ungodly, doesn't stand in the way of sinners, doesn't sit in the seat of those who are scornful. How many of you have heard that verse before? But look at the next line. Their delight is supposed to be in what? Torah. Oh my gosh, so many people, Torah is not a delight. It's a poison pill. But no. The delight is supposed to be in the Torah, and in his Torah, we're to meditate day and night. How often are we supposed to be meditating in Torah? And if you chuck it and throw it out, you're sure not going to spend any time meditating in it. Let's look at Exodus 18, the next few verses, verse 23 and 24. Again, look at Jethro's attitude. He says, and if you do this, but also only if God commands you to. So he was even submitted to God. He said, look, you make sure God is telling you to do this as well. Then he says, you'll be able to endure, and all the people will also go to their place in peace. And get a load of this. What did Moses do? Did Moses go, what, you're trying to tell me what to do? You ain't the boss of me. He didn't take it all personal and get all offended. I hear from God face to face, and you're telling me. No. And here this guy isn't even part of his tribe, so to speak. He's not even a part of Israel. And yet he is willing to listen to an outsider, heed their advice, and he did what he said. And I think that says a lot about Moses' humility as well. So now we go to the next chapter. Here we are in chapter 19, verse 1 through 3. And I think I changed, the verse is the same, but on your notes, I'm going to read it a little bit differently because I decided I like this other translation better. But you're going to be able to follow along. On the third new moon, I think it says the third month, but I like the idea of it was the third new moon. That kind of really gets us focused on the fact that it's based on the new moon. After the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they set out from Rephidim, came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain while Moses went up to God. Now, you know what's amazing? The other thing, the reason I chose this is twice it says they encamped. I think in yours, may have said once they encamped, but it's really, the question is, why did they say they encamped 2 times in a row? It's almost like they could have got rid of one of the encampments. They could have just said they came into the wilderness of Sinai and they encamped before the mountain while Moses went up. I mean, why the extra emphasis? Well, I'm going to show you something that you don't see in English. You only see it in the Hebrew. The first time it says they encamped, all right, it's vayikanu, which means they camped, but it's in the plural. They is plural, right? He is singular, she is singular, they is plural. So the first time where it says they encamped, it's vayikanu, which means all of them camped. But the next time where it says there, Israel encamped before the mountain, it's no longer vayikanu, it's vayikan in the singular. So how come when it's talking about a plurality of people, the first time it says the plurality of people camped there, and the very next sentence it says, and singularly they encamped there, it's because what they say is they were united as one. Just like when the Spirit fell at Passover, just like Spirit fell at Shavuot, just like the Spirit fell at Tabernacles, what it's showing is here that they were echad, they were one. They weren't ahat, one singular, but they were one in unity. So here, as they're encamping on Shavuot, they're encamping as one. And this is why God's glory fell, the fire fell. So I thought that was interesting. But here we also see that Moses is going up the mountain. Now, I don't know about you, whenever I thought of Moses in these chapters, Exodus 19, I'm thinking of him going up and he stays there for 40 days and 40 nights, right? That's not what happened. First off, how old is Moses? He's 80 years old, and he's climbing mountains. Now look at verse 6. He goes up there, and God tells him, you're to be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. They're to be holy. These are the words which you shall speak unto the children of Israel. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was an 80-year-old man and I just climbed a mountain to hear about, 20 words and then have to go back down, I think I would ask God, could you have told me that while I was down here? But if it's only going to be about 10 seconds of phrase, you really could have spared me a walk, But he goes all the way back down the hill. And what does he do in verse 7? He calls for all the elders to come. And he lays before their faces all of these words that the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And here they're willing to do it even before they even heard everything. We're willing to do it. And so Moses climbs back up the mountain again to hear what's next. But here's something I want to point out too. As I was, doing my research on all of this, I love studying. One of the Jewish rabbis had made the comment that I thought was so fascinating. When was the last time God was speaking to people on earth before this, really? It was in the Garden of Eden. All right? God had a grand entrance there to Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve get kicked out. He's left. Now he's coming back on earth to dwell in the tabernacle. And in one sense, he said, this is the very moment that God has been waiting for, has finally arrived. Not just since the day that God sent Moses back to Egypt has God been waiting, but ever since the dawn of creation itself. Why would God have created a world to begin with if it wasn't to imbue the world with the truth of the Torah? That's why God created it, because he wants his words to be operating on earth. And here, so quickly, Adam and Eve were kicked out. Now, here, after a couple thousand years, he's coming back and he's going to be able to impart the Torah to a people. And so the other thing is God is about to marry Israel. He's entering into a wedding covenant. All right? The marriage certificate or the ketubah will be the Torah itself. And the marriage canopy or the chuppah will be the heavens and the cloud that descends that's going to be covering the people. But God is determined to even outdo himself. He's going to strike up the thunder. He's going to cause the mountain to quake. He's going to set the mountain on fire and enshroud the mountains with thick smoke. This is his wedding day to his people. And so in Exodus 19, verse 8 and 9, Moses goes back up and returns the words of the people to the Lord and said, guess what? They said everything you're going to say, they're going to do it. And the Lord said to Moses, okay, I'm going to come to you in a thick cloud that the people may hear when I speak with you, and they're going to believe you forever. Moses is probably thinking, yeah, right. But Moses tells the words of the people to the Lord, all the good news. And then God says, okay, climb back down the mountain. And go tell the people to sanctify themselves today and tomorrow and let them wash their clothes. I don't know what kind of laundromat they had 3,500 years ago in the desert with no water. But they washed their clothes. Actually, what this is, God is saying, I've given them 2 days to get their wedding gown ready. This is the big day. It's the wedding, and all the brides, they want to get there, make sure they got their wedding garment looking nice. Well, I think it's interesting in Revelation chapter 3, verse 5, it talks about whoever overcomes is going to be arrayed in white garments. And I will no way blot his name out of the book of life, and I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. This is incredible. We're to have on our wedding garments and be ready. Because look at Revelation 3, 17 and 18. And I want to emphasize, this is not an unbelieving people. This is the church he's speaking to here. And because a church is saying, I'm rich, I've gotten riches, I have need of nothing. And he says, and you, church, don't even know you're wretched, miserable, poor, blind, naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, that you may become truly rich, and get yourself some white garments, that you may clothe yourself, that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed, and anoint yourself with eye salve, that you can really see. There's a church who's blind. They're all after the prosperity doctrine. It's all about me, get wealth. Matter of fact, let's go to the Gospels. This is in Matthew chapter 22, verse 9 and 13. It says, go therefore to the intersections of the highways. As many as you find, invite them to the marriage feast. Now, this is important. He said, whoever you find, invite them to the marriage feast. And so what did they do? The servants went out into the highways and gathered together as many as they could find, both what? Wow, our job is not to decide who's in and who's out. Our job is just to bring them in. God is the one who decides. And the wedding was now filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he saw there a man who didn't have on the proper wedding clothing. And notice he calls him friend. How did you get in here not wearing wedding clothing? And the guy was speechless. And the king said to his servants, why don't you go bind him hand and foot, take him away, throw him in the outer darkness where there's weeping and grinding of teeth will be. Wow, that's pretty scary. This tells you how important it is to have on the right garments. In other words, in case you didn't know, back then in that day, let's say you're a king, and in your kingdom, you're going to have poor people, as well as you're going to have wealthy people, as well as middle-class people. And if you're going to have a wedding for your son and you want everyone to come, all right, well, you want the poor people to feel good about themselves. So the king would provide garments for everybody to come when they came. But here are some people thinking, I don't want your garments. I'm going to wear my own finery. I'm going to come in my suit. Okay. Well, what God is saying, no, we can't come in our own righteousness. We can't come in our own good works. We have to come in with the garment that he has provided for us. As a matter of fact, look at Zephaniah 1, verse 7 and 8. It says, be silent at the presence of the Lord. The Lord, for the day of the Lord is at hand. Look at this. The Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He's consecrated his guests. It will happen in the day of the Lord's sacrifice. Look at this. I'm going to punish the princes, the king's own sons, and all those who are clothed with foreign clothing. This is God speaking about his own people who's having a wedding, asking people to come, but you better come in the right garments. I think another fascinating verse. How many of you want to be at the wedding of the Messiah? Hello, I want to be there, right? But how many of you know there will be believers? There will be believers who don't make it to the wedding. I'm not talking about as the bride. I'm talking about as guests. No, I don't believe the entire body is the bride. A remnant of the body will be the bride. And a lot of the believers are part of the body, but not part of the bride. But then there's also going to be believers who don't even get to attend the wedding. But the good news is, after the wedding, then they get to enter into the kingdom. but they missed the wedding. I'm going to show you the verse. Many of you are familiar with the foolish virgins and the lamp burning. Well, here's the version for the men. It says in Luke 12:35 through 37, let your waist be dressed and your lamps burning. Be like men watching, I'm going to insert this time, for their Lord, when he returns from the marriage feast, that when he comes and he knocks, that they may immediately open to him. Blessed are those servants whom the Lord will find watching when he comes. Most certainly, I tell you, he will dress himself, make them recline, and will come and serve them. So basically, just like with the foolish virgins, the Lord is going to be coming. Blessed are those that are watching, that open the door immediately or are ready to go immediately. Because if you're not ready and the door is shut, you're going to come and he's going to say, too late, I'll see you after the wedding. And then he will see them after the wedding. And then look at Exodus 19:11. He says, be ready for which day? Because on the third day, the Lord will come down in the sight of who? All the people on Mount Sinai. You know what's incredible about the third day and the Lord coming down in the sight of all the people? Look at Hosea chapter 6. This is verse 1 and 2. Now, how many of you know that when the Lord came, okay, he ascended into heaven, he returned back to heaven, and then a generation later, Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple was destroyed. Look at this prophecy in Hosea 6. He's prophesying Israel is going to say, come and let us return to the Lord, for he has torn and he will heal us. He has stricken and he will bind us up. After 2 days, he will bring us to life. And in the third day, he will raise us up and we shall live in his sight. A day with the Lord is how many years? And after 2,000 years, Israel becomes a nation again, okay? He brought them back to life. We are now entering the third day, speaking of the millennial reign of Messiah, when he will resurrect the dead and we will live in his sight. This is what this verse is prophesying. And so, let's look at Exodus 19:12 through 15. And you shall set bounds to the people around about, saying, take heed to yourselves, do not go up into the mountain. Don't even touch the border. Whoever touches the mountain will be what? More than put to death. Surely put to death. There shall not be a hand to touch it, but that he shall surely be stoned or shot through, whether it's a beast or a man, it's not going to live. And then he says, when the trumpet sounds long, they shall come up to the mountain. And so what? Moses went down from the mountain to the people. He just got the instructions, tell everybody, don't touch it. This is like his 5th time up and down the mountain. He goes, I don't want to go back up there again. So Moses goes down, he sanctifies the people. They all wash their clothes. And he said to the people, be ready for the third day. And that's what I'm telling you right now. Be ready for the third day. We're here. And so look at Exodus 19:20. The Lord came down on Mount Sinai, the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses, hey, come on back up again. And Moses goes, okay. And as soon as he gets up there, God says, go back down. Command the people, lest they break through to the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish. And Moses says, I already did. The people can't come up to the Mount Sinai, for you commanded us, saying, set the bounds around the mountain, sanctify it. And the Lord said to him, get out of here. Go back down there. And then I want you to come back up with Aaron. Down he goes. 19 verse 25. Moses goes back down to the people. And he tells them, get back from this mountain. Now, so first, here's our little PowerPoint. Moses, 40 years, or not 40 years earlier, but a little bit earlier, here he sees this burning bush on Mount Sinai. And God tells him, after these plagues, you're going to come back here and serve me on this mountain. But this time when the Lord descends, the whole mountain's on fire. It is just one burning place. And what does the Lord do? He gives them his words. This is how I want you to relate to me. And so we see in Exodus 20, verse 1 through 3, and God spoke all of these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Now, if I were to ask you what the 10 Commandments are, okay, the Exodus 20, and it's easy to remember that the 10 Commandments, you can find them in Exodus 20 because he had to do it twice, and 10 times 2 was 20. So you just think Exodus, 20 is where the 10 Commandments are given. But if you were to ask Protestants what the 10 Commandments are, it's going to be different than what the Catholics say the 10 Commandments are. It's going to be different from what the Jews say the 10 Commandments are. This is part of the problem on having the 10 Commandments in the courthouse is which version are we supposed to have? All right? Well, basically, everything is there, but the problem is commandments is an improper translation. It's not the 10 Commandments, it's the 10 words. Okay? Now, here's the thing. In the Jewish concept, the first one is, what is right here? Hey, I'm the one who set you free. Now, that's not a commandment. That's just a comment. But God said, how many of you know before you're going to do anything anybody says, you're going to establish the relationship with that person? All right? And so God is establishing the relationship, saying, look, I'm the one who got you out of Egypt. I'm the one who set you free. I'm the one who wants to marry you. In other words, look, this is who I am. Now, here God is speaking all these words. We know from Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, out of the abundance of the heart, what happens? Out of the abundance, how many believe that? Okay, well, think about this. Who spoke the Torah to Moses? God did. God spoke it. Out of the abundance of the heart, God gave Moses the Torah. Moses was just a scribe writing it down. So we don't look at it, the Torah, as the law of Moses. We need to see the Torah as the law of God as given to Moses. And how can we hate the law and say the law is done away with when we realize these are God's words? Okay, not Moses' words. This is God's word. And he said it out of love. He didn't give you the law to lay a burden upon you. He gave you the law to set you free. Okay, look at Matthew 4:4. Here it says, but he answered and said, man shall not live by bread alone, but by what? Every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Man lives by every word except for the Torah that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Does that make sense? Man lives by every word except for that stinking Torah that we don't want to follow. But everything else, it's good. Doesn't make sense. When was God's first words first spoken? It was on Mount Sinai with the giving of the Torah. Now, let's look at Exodus 34, verse 28. This is jumping a little bit, but I wanted to show you something. It says, and he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He didn't eat bread or drink water. And he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, even the 10 Commandments. Now, if your Bible says 10 Commandments, it's the wrong translation. It's literally 10 words. Now, in 1 John, now how many of you know the Apostle John, or Yochanan, is in the New Covenant or New Testament times? And look what he says. By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and do what? And keep his commandments. And he says, this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. That's what the church needs to hear. The commandments are not burdensome. How burdensome is it? Don't kill your neighbor. Well, it depends, but I'm kidding. That's not supposed to be burdensome. All right. Now, and again, we follow what God says because we are his kids, not so we can become his kids. There's a big difference there. In Exodus 20, verse 6, though, it says he shows mercy to thousands of them that what? Love me and keep my commandments. This is what John was quoting. He was quoting this verse here. There is no dispensationalism when it comes to loving God and keeping his commandments. It was the same back then, and it's the same in the New Covenant and even in the New Testament. If we love God, we're going to be showing mercy, okay? Now, let me say this. How do you know if you keep the commandments, you don't need mercy? If you keep the commandments, you don't need mercy. So this statement is referring to those who are trying to keep the commandments, but they fail when they try to keep them. Mercy is not shown to those who continually disobey and feels God's law do not apply to them. All right? So let's say you get stopped for a speeding ticket, something like that, and the judge has to decide if he's going to show you mercy, if he looks at your record and saw that you never did speed before, and maybe you had a reason for speeding because someone was about to run into your car or you had to get away, someone was chasing you, who know what, he'll show mercy. But if you go there for speeding and you tell the judge to stick it in his ear, you plan on continually speeding, is he going to show you mercy? No. Okay, this is where we need to rethink these things. Okay, now, the word commandments is mitzvot, but what's interesting, the very word mitzvot, the root word means to be a team, to join. So in other words, God is keeping the commandments, and he's not asking you to do it apart from him. He's asking you to join him in the work. The mitzvot, or the commandments, are considered the good works, the good deeds, taking care of there's a commandment to take care of the widows, the fatherless, right? And God is saying, look, I'm taking care of the widow and the fatherless, and I want you to team up with me in my work of taking care of them. And then so often in Christianity, that doesn't apply to me. I don't have to do that. Then you're not wanting to work with him. So we need to see it in terms of the commandments as something that we want to do because we're joining God in his work. So here we have the mitzvot, and when Yeshua says to take up my yoke, here he's the ox, he's the one that's going to pull the load, and we just get to come along with him. All right? He's saying, I want you to learn my ways. The whole idea of the commandments is like a bicycle that's built for two. All right, God is the one that's going to be pulling the load, and we get to be along for the ride. So keeping the commandments is the way that we work with Dad. That's what the concept is. Okay, so let's go back and let's look at some of the other 10 words. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 through 11. God says, I want you to remember the Sabbath day and to keep it what? And what does holy mean? Okay, so if every day is the Sabbath, nothing is holy. If you say every day is my Sabbath, well, then nothing is holy, okay? He says, work 6 days, do all your work. 7th day is a Sabbath, not for you. The Sabbath is for the Lord your God. Don't do any work. None of your, relatives. None of your female servants and all that. And then look at this. It says the reason why is because in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that's in it, and he rested on the 7th day. That's why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day. None of the other days, are like the Sabbath. It's completely different. And it says he's the one who made it holy. So when we think of God's Sabbath, though, we have to think in terms of not just Shabbat, but the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Passover, Shavuot, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. It's not just the Sabbath. It's all of these Sabbaths that he has during the year. And God says, these are my Sabbaths. They're not the Jewish Sabbaths. They're my Sabbaths. Okay? All of these are different Sabbaths unto the Lord. And then we find in verse 18 through 23, all the people perceived the thundering and the lightning and the sound of the shofar, and the mountain is smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled, they stayed at a distance. And this is one of the worst sentences in the whole Bible. This is the biggest problem that set Israel downhill from the very beginning. They tell Moses, you just speak to us and we'll listen, but don't let God speak to us, lest we die. And so Moses said to the people, hey, don't be afraid. God's come to test you, that his fear may be before you, that you won't sin. But the people stayed at a distance. But what does Moses do? He draws near into the thick darkness where God was. And the Lord tells Moses, here's what I want you to tell the children of Israel. You yourselves have seen that I've talked with you from heaven. You shall most certainly not make alongside of me gods of silver and gods of gold for yourselves. And then we'll close with the Haftorah, or the section that goes with the Torah portion. Here's where Isaiah gets to see the glory of God, just like Israel did. It was in the year King Uzziah died. And Isaiah says, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up. His train filled the temple, and above him were the seraphim having 6 wings, and they're calling out one to another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And it says the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house is filled with smoke, just like the mountain was. And Isaiah says, woe is me, I'm undone. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. My eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Can you imagine what that's going to be like? But then he goes on to say, this is part of the Haftorah, which is really interesting. Famous verse you're all familiar with. For unto us a child is born, a son is given, the government will be upon his shoulder. Look at his name. This child's name is going to be called a Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end upon the throne of David, upon his kingdom, to order it, establish it with judgment, justice from henceforth and forever. And the zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. Now I want to show you something. Look at the PowerPoint. Here's Isaiah 9:6-7, that section that says, one of his names is the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end. Now, how many of you know there's something very incredible in Hebrew about this verse? They found this when they're looking at what they found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Here's an actual copy of the Dead Sea Scroll of this verse. Now, I'm going to bring this up because I want to show you something. Can anyone read the underlined words? Shalom. That's shalom. Now, I want you to notice the last letter is the closed mem. Do you see the closed mem? Whenever the mem is at the, just like a capital B versus a small b, in Hebrew, when the last letter can be different. Okay, if the last letter, mem, it's closed. But do you see the open mem is when it's anywhere else in the word? For example, you can see the 2 closed mems in shalom, but notice the open mem right here. Do you see the 2 open mems by that bottom arrow pointing to it? Does everyone see these 2 mems here? Do you see how they're open in the corner, but these mems are closed at the bottom left corner? But guess what? There is an anomaly here where it talks about of the increase, there will be no end. Get a load of this. Right here is the word of the increase, and it is le marbeh. And notice the closed mem is at the beginning of a word. Why? This is the only time in the Tanakh where the mem is closed and it's at the beginning of a word. Now, how many of you know the Septuagint was written a couple hundred years before Christ was even born? Well, there are commentaries of what the Jews thought of this verse back then. What's the Hebrew word for water? Mayim. Hear the M in mayim? The beginning is an open mem, and the last letter would be a closed mem. That means water, all right? Well, we know that when a baby breaks, the water comes out. And the sages say a closed mem means like a virgin birth, or you can't have babies. But an open mem is someone who can have babies. And so what they said, because the mem is at the beginning of a word and it's closed, that means whoever this verse applies to is going to have a miraculous birth. Are you following me? And so when I talk to Orthodox Jews about this, they don't really know what to say because they know all of their tradition about the closed mem and the open mem and giving birth and not able to give birth. And now when it talks about this wonderful person, they even agreed 200 years before the Messiah that this applies to a miraculous birth taking place. Now that's incredible. Here we go. We're in the book of Revelations. So far, the 5th angel has sounded the first woe from Revelation 9. Beasts and locusts ascending from the bottomless pit. Boy, and this whole locust situation naturally is getting pretty bad over there. Then we have the sixth angel sounding with the second woe from Revelations 9 through 11. We've had 4 angels loose for a year, a day, a month, and an hour. We have 200,000 horsemen, fire, smoke, and brimstone coming out of their mouth. A third of mankind is killed. 2 witnesses are testifying, smiting the earth with plagues and fire coming out of their mouths. Isn't that interesting? The bad guys have fire coming out of their mouth, and the good guys have fire coming out of their mouth. This brings us to Revelation 11:7. Look at this. Concerning the 2 witnesses, when they finished their testimony, there's a beast, and the beast ascends out of the bottomless pit, is going to make war with them and overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies are going to line the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Wow, there's a lot there. Here we have a beast that's ascending out of the bottomless pit. And look at this. These 2 witnesses, they have been smiting the earth with plagues, fire coming out of their mouths, destroying people. So when this beast ascends out of the bottomless pit and kills them, all the world is going to think that they are the 2 witnesses, and they just destroyed the Antichrist and the false prophet. So you can see how this could be very confusing. But look at this. It says that great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. What city was the Lord crucified in? Here, Jerusalem is being compared to Sodom. What in the world? How is Jerusalem being compared to Sodom? Well, I don't know if you know this, but on this, if you do a research, they list the 11 most gay-friendly cities. And this is a gay website. And they're listing, if you're gay, these are the cities you want to go to. List the top 11. The number 1 gay-friendly city is Tel Aviv. A lot of people don't know that. When they go to Israel, they think it's all going to be holy. No. So those of you that are coming know this. Tel Aviv is the number 1 gay city. And this is why? That's the big question. But look at Jeremiah chapter 23 and verse 14. Look at this. I have seen also in who? The prophets of Jerusalem. A horrible thing. The prophets in Jerusalem are committing adultery. They're walking in lies. They strengthen the hands of evildoers, that none does return from his wickedness. They are all of them unto me as who? As Sodom, and the inhabitants thereof as Gomorrah. See, this is showing Jerusalem ends up doing worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. Look at verse 15 of Jeremiah 23. Therefore says the Lord of hosts concerning the prophets, behold, I will feed them with what? Don't we find that in the Revelation? What happens? This great star called the wormwood falls on the waters and the rivers, and it makes all the water bitter. And here these prophets are having to drink the bitter water of the wormwood. It's from all the prophets of Jerusalem is profaneness gone forth into all the land. Look at verse 17. This is one of the most incredible This is another one of my most incredible verses in all the Bible. I have several, as you know. But look at not only what the prophets are saying, but look at who the prophets are speaking to. He's speaking to God's people, okay? But look at this. The prophets say unto them that despise me. The people despise God. And the prophets are saying to those that despise me, the Lord has said, you shall have peace. And they say unto everyone that walks after the imagination of his own heart, no evil will come upon you. Wow. Peace, peace, when there is no peace, they just prophesy what people want to hear. And it's to the ones that despise God, and he's telling them, go ahead, just keep going. No evil will come upon you. As a matter of fact, Jeremiah is lamenting the destruction of Jerusalem. And look what it says in Lamentations 4:6. For the punishment of the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the punishment of the sin of Sodom that was overthrown as in a moment, and no hand stayed upon her. All right, I have a question, a quiz. How many of you guys like quizzes? Who were Jerusalem's parents? Who gave birth to Jerusalem? Who were Jerusalem's parents? You know what I always say? See what the Bible says. Let's look at and who were Jerusalem's sisters? Who were Jerusalem's sisters? We just talked about who her parents were, but who were her sisters? I think you know. I think you're right, but let's watch. Genesis 13:18. Abram removes his tent. He comes and dwells in the plain of Mamre, which is in where? Hebron. And he built there an altar to the Lord. Now let's look at Genesis 14:13. And there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the who? The Amorites are dwelling in Hebron when Abram, works with them. And there's a brother of Eshcol and the brother of Aner. These were confederate with Abram. So we see there's the Amorite dwelling in Hebron. They were in control. But look what happens in Genesis 23:10. The Amorites lose control of Hebron to the Hittites. The Hittites conquer the area. We see in Genesis 23:10, and Ephron dwelt among the children of Het, and Ephron the Hittite, answers Abraham, in the audience of the children of Het. Even all that went in at the gate of his city going on. So the Amorites were controlling that area. Then the Hittites conquered the Amorites. Now they're controlling the area, which is another reason why Ephron probably never paid a dime for the city of Hebron or for the cave of Machpelah. He probably just took it in a military victory. Then he totally ripped Abraham off. But now we see there were the Amorites and the Hittites were together. Does everyone see that? I'm sure, why they were at war. Some of them probably got along with each other. But here's your answer. Look at Ezekiel. Who founded the original city? In Ezekiel 61-3. Again, the word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man, cause Jerusalem to know her abominations and say, Thus says the Lord God unto Jerusalem, your origin and your nativity is in the land of the Canaanites. The Amorite was your father, and your mother was a Hittite. An Amorite married a Hittite, and they were the ones who founded the city. Remember, it went from Jebus, Jerusalem, but when you look at who founded the original city, God himself says you were in the land of Canaan. The Amorite was your father. Your mother was a Hittite. Now look at verse 4 and 5. And as for your nativity, in the day you were born, your navel wasn't cut. Neither were you washed in water for cleansing. You were not salted at all, nor swaddled at all. No, I pitied you to do any of these to you, to have compassion on you. You were cast out in the open field in the loathsomeness of your person in the day you were born. In other words, the Amorite and the Hittite were horrible parents. It had to do with child neglect, abandonment. And how many of you know sometimes if you're a neglected child, an abandoned child, things don't go well. Your father's an Amorite, your mother's a Hittite, which is basically the terrorist. So let's look at verse 45 and 46. He goes on to say, in Jerusalem, you're just like your mother, the Hittite, that loathes her husband and her children. You are the sister of your sisters who also loathe their husbands and their children. Yes, your mother was a Hittite, your father was an Amorite, and your elder sister is Samaria that dwells at your left hand, she and her daughters, and your younger sister that dwells at your right hand is Sodom. Take a look at the map. Okay, the temple faced east. If it's facing east, to the left is Samaria, to the right is Sodom. Okay, so the sisters of Jerusalem are the surrounding cities. You following me? So now we see an Amorite and a Hittite were the original founders of Jerusalem, and they really could care less for their spouse, for their kids. And now we see while Jerusalem faces east, to the left is Samaria, to the right is Sodom. They were considered their sisters. Now look at Isaiah 1, 9 through 13. Speaking of Israel, it says, except the Lord of hosts had left us a very small remnant, we would have been as Sodom. We would have been like Gomorrah. Hear the word of the Lord, ye rulers of Sodom. And he's speaking to Jerusalem here when he says that. Give ear to the law of our God, you people of Gomorrah. And again, he's speaking to Israel. There is Sodom and Gomorrah here. And he says, to what purpose is the multitudes of your sacrifices to me? God is always concerned with what? The heart. All right? I mean, just if someone's doing something for you, do you ever wonder why they're doing this? What is your motivation behind this? You know, I mentioned this several times before, but it still cracks me up. My wife and I were in Wichita, and this was back in the Moonies. Who remembers the Moonies? Where we come up to a stop sign, and this lady has these flowers in her hand, and you know, we roll down the window, and she says to Vicky, "Oh, you're very pretty. Want a flower?" You know, yeah. Flattery will get you everywhere. No, just kidding. But the whole concept is, why do people say things? Why do people do things? Do you ever wonder someone's motives? Well, there's nothing wrong with the sacrifices. God is the one who set up the sacrifices, but he wants to know, why are you bringing the sacrifices? Why do you come to church? Why do you do anything that you do? I mean, some people come to church, maybe they're with a multi-marketing level system, you know, and that's what they're claiming to come to church for. Maybe they want a boyfriend, a girlfriend. People come to church for lots of different reasons. And all God is saying here is, okay, why are you bringing me these sacrifices? Okay. He says, I am fed up of the burnt offerings of rams, the fat of fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls and lambs and he-goats. When ye come to appear before me, who required this at your hand to trample my courts? Bring no more vain oblations. It's an offering of an abomination to me. New moons, Sabbaths, the holding of convocations. I can't endure iniquity along with the solemn assembly. It's not that God is opposed to those things. He's opposed to those things when the motivation is completely wrong. In Isaiah 3, 8 through 15, Jerusalem is ruined. Judah is fallen. Why? Because their tongue and their doings are against the Lord to provoke the eyes of his glory. The show of their countenance witnesses against them, and they declare their sin as Sodom, and they don't even hide it. You can look at people's faces and know where they're at. He says, woe to their soul, for they have brought evil unto themselves. Say ye of the righteous that it will be well with him, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings. But woe to the wicked, it will be ill with them, for the work of his hands shall be done to him. In other words, measure for measure. The way we treat people is the way we are going to be treated. The way we treat God is the way God's going to treat us. He looks at the heart, not just the actions. Now look at Jeremiah 1, 14 through 17. God says, your new moons and your appointed seasons, my soul hates. They're a burden to me. I'm weary to bear them. He's not saying his new moons and his appointed seasons. They've replaced everything. They've damaged everything. I mean, how would, if you totally do something horrible to your spouse and then you try to bring them flowers or chocolates, what are they going to do with the flowers and the chocolates? Okay, God says, look, I want you to, it's a relationship. It's always about a relationship. It's not that he doesn't want these things. What he's saying is he wants it brought to him with the right motivation. Look at this. When you spread forth your hands, in worship or in prayer, he says, I'm going to hide my eyes from you. When you make many prayers, I'm not even going to hear because your hands are full of blood. Wash you, make you clean. How? By putting away the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Stop doing evil. Learn to do well. Seek justice. Relieve the oppressed. Judge the fatherless. Plead for the widow. That's really what he wants. Look at Ezekiel. Chapter 16, verse 49 and 50. Before you look at that, think about this for a minute. What was the sin of Sodom? What was the sin of Sodom? Many people think, well, obviously it was the gay lifestyle. That wasn't the sin of Sodom. Just like dandelions in your yard. If you don't pull up the root, you just cut off the top, what's going to happen? It's going to come back. Homosexuality was not the root of the problem. That was the flower of the problem. Here was the problem. Look at Ezekiel 16, 49, 50. Behold, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. The number one thing is what? Pride. Fullness of bread. Careless ease was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy. They were haughty, and they committed abomination before me. Therefore I removed them when I saw it. That's why in Proverbs 6, it says there are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 are abomination, and the first one is what? That's right, a proud look. Okay, there's hands that shed innocent blood. There's a lying tongue. Those that sow discord among the brethren. Is that right? Now, how many know we're supposed to have equal weights and measures? Well, in those top 7 abominations, not one of them is homosexuality. In the top 7, 4 of them are found in the church. A proud look, lying tongue, those that sow discord among the brethren. And I'm not saying I am pro-homosexuality, but I am saying I'm pro the church having equal standards, and those are an abomination that are worse than homosexuality. And yet we like to go according to public opinion, and we will say, ooh, that's bad. Well, yeah, well, what about what's going on in the church? And so God is dealing with the church here. And then look at Revelation 11, 8 and 9. They of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations are going to see their dead bodies. How many days? All right. And this tells you that the nations are in control of Jerusalem, like the United Nations. If Israel was in control of Jerusalem, they'd be buried the same day. These 2 are Jewish prophets. Okay, and they're prophesying. They're 2 witnesses. They're prophesying in Jerusalem. The fact that they're not buried tells you that Israel is not in control of Jerusalem. The United Nations are. And it says they're not going to suffer their dead bodies to even be put in graves.
Thank you for joining with us. We hope you learned something new today. Please partner with us in fulfilling the scriptures about taking God's Torah to the nations. You can watch this whole program for free, along with all of our other archive programs right from our website link shown below. We hope to see you soon at our location right here in Tacoma, Washington. See you soon.